Someone's going to uncover that I really don't know what I'm doing and I'm on the hairy edge of my ability level.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Our guest today talks about what it takes to build a global franchise and target a demographic that holds 70% of the nation's disposable income. A pioneer of personal training, he's internationally recognized as an expert in systems and scaling, the think tank advisor for Gold's Gym, and also an advisor for both the American Council on Exercise and the Georgia State University, helping millions of members around the world with a mantra of assessment, accountability, and actualisation. Please welcome CEO of Alloy Personal Training, Mr. Rick Mayo, to the Escape Your Limits podcast.
So Rick, thanks for joining us today. It's been quite a while since we've met face to face.
Yeah, we were catching up before we hit record about the last time we met face to face, which was probably 5 or 6 years ago. But I've been following along closely, so it's great to reconnect, and I'm excited to talk to you today. And thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. So I was just saying off camera, I when I go to all these events, I have a little note section in my iPhone, and I was looking back at the people I'd met, and yours was one of the sessions. I think they've got to really talk about group training and how that's, probably at the time how it was going to be the next big thing. And I remember listening to everything. I thought this, it's just such a solid argument, and the way and the systems that you'd been able to, I guess at the time, transition people from just personal training to small group training. And I thought it'd be an interesting place to start, because I guess we've had, that was probably at the very beginning of all of this. My guess is you're one of the pioneers, and not just the pioneers, but someone that had been successful at the implementation part of that. What's your sort of assessment over that period of time? How did that model go? Did that idea that you presented and you were being successful at the time, did that take hold as you thought it may do in the wider industry? And yeah, just what's your sort of assessment of that the difference between that moment in time and where we are today?
Sure. I think at the time it was the front edge, Matt, of the studio model, and I mean the independent studio model. So as you know, a lot of times markets are just reactive to what's going on, right? And so we were just starting to see traction with brands, boot camp brands, standalone studios dedicated to just large group, or what we call team training, right? Obviously, Orange Theory was just getting started. And so a lot of these brands were just in their infancy. And so savvy owners of large clubs were saying, hi, instead of losing our top 300, 200 members to these other brands, and maybe not even losing them because they might keep their gym membership and go there for the group training experience, but let's not lose that revenue, right? And so let's build something, sort of this studio within a large club concept, if you will, to retain that revenue and to be relevant, to stay on trend, which, as you know, fitness is quite trendy. And then how do we stay engaged with our customers? How do we give them something under the same roof that we know is popular? And so I would say that from that talk up until about 2 years ago, it was the right way to go. And, I think obviously you've built an entire a business around it, done a great job of servicing that, right? I own a large health club and I want to install a studio. I have to create a space and an environment and a customer experience that's going to rival what someone's going to get in a studio standalone space, which is not easy to do. So you start to see this studio within a larger club concept. And I think at this point in time, most every large club model has gone to it, right? They have something, and that's been good for all of us that operate in that space. So I would say from then up until about 2 years ago, it was the right call. And a lot of people have made a lot of money and retained a lot of revenue, and done really well with that model. So up until a few years ago, I would say that we were dead on, and then certainly we can talk about, what's going on now.
And one of the interesting things I've seen, because I think when I met you, I know I wasn't living in the US, and since I've been here, I've certainly seen a lot of these what I guess you know what I mean when you call these sort of boot camp standalone concepts that I've not really seen as much. Certainly in Europe, I don't think they've taken hold in the same way. But these are generally smaller studios that are sort of weight loss based, and they seem to still be doing quite well, or prior to what's happened recently, but they still seem to be doing quite well, and they seem to have tapped into a slightly different market than what I would class as more the sort of traditional mainstream multi-site operators. What are your thoughts? Am I correct in that assessment? And if so, what are your thoughts on that type of model as opposed to what some of the sort of larger operators are doing, where that's just part of one of the services that they offer?
Yeah, I think there's some crossover. So I'm not going to say that these studios tapped into a completely different market. It certainly tapped into a market that might have been doing, that might have sought out one-on-one training as an example in the past, right? Where they would see something like an on-brand group training model as less expensive than one-on-one training, maybe a little bit more fun. They looked at it, they had a great customer avatar, and the price threshold maybe brought the age threshold down a little bit, right? So if I could pay $99 and get a coaching experience in a group setting versus $70 a session or $70 an hour with personal training, I think we pulled some of that crowd, and we also pulled some of the crowd that was working out at a health club that maybe didn't even want to leave the club, but just wanted a dynamic group training experience. And if the club didn't have a really, really good offering for it, they would lose those customers. Maybe, again, maybe not wholly, but they would lose that aspect of their business over to these studios, because you and I both know, Matt, it's really hard to recreate an entire customer experience in four walls built around one modality, right? It really is. Now that has its inherent challenges as well, but I would say that that it didn't cannibalize the industry so much as it just provided a different mousetrap, right, for fitness. And the larger clubs that built an in-club studio that was dynamic, they did well. Ones that sort of missed the boat, or maybe they didn't put as much time into design or equipment layout. And you know how the customer experience drives all of that, right? And how important that is. They didn't do as well. Here's what I will say though: like if you look at it now, there's a couple of advantages that the large clubs have that do multiple things, and there's advantages to the single modality studios, right? Like heart rate training, like an Orange Theory. We'll just use them because they're a great example. So a large club can typically beat a studio model on value, meaning they have other line items of revenue and other verticals, the biggest being base membership. So if your threshold to the gym is anywhere from a $10 to a $50 a month membership, as an example, then there is some revenue, and that may cover most of the expenses, if not be a nice profit model for them. So when you look at then adding group training, you're typically able to offer it at a much more compelling offer. So, in the last few years, we've seen large clubs come in at some of them that are real high volume, that are $10 a month clubs, they're really good operators. They'll come in at $49 all in, and that will get you unlimited group training in a standalone studio inside of a big facility, as well as a health club membership. So does that duplicate the feeling of pulling up to a standalone brick and mortar where you walk in and they just do one thing? Maybe not, but that $49 price point is pretty darn compelling, right? Whereas the studio models, even though their price has been coming down as the market's become more saturated, they still sit around that 100 to 149 price point in most markets. So they can create a better experience and they monetize it. The large clubs can create an equally good experience, but it's a little bit like, let's use Group X as an example. Like, if you did a programmed group exercise spin class in a large gym, it's probably a pretty good workout, right? And you might even be able to create an amazing experience in that spin room, but it still doesn't rival, and that's why you can't charge $40 a class like you might be able to in a real high end, Soul Cycle or something like that, right? It's just a different animal, but each one has its advantages if you do it well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you've sort of had a number of different models and probably a lot of experience, and particularly as this has been, I guess, your baby, as opposed to you having other lots and lots of locations to focus on. So if probably some of the people who are listening to this fall into both of those camps, what would you say are some of the key success factors, or if you were I suppose if you were owning each one, what would be sort of one or two of those things that you really need to get right almost like the 80-20 rule. What's the 20% in each one of those models that you've got to get right if you're going to make it work, and that's where you should be spending some of your time and energy thinking about.
I think we'll start on the large club side. So for those guys, they have to make sure that they are fully committed to the Ascension business model, meaning they are not there just to sell a base membership, but the entire team, which, as you know, starts from the minute that someone takes a tour in a club and thinks they're only looking for base membership, right? You have to start having those conversations at that point in time if you ever plan on getting any penetration of your membership into these group training options, right? Into your room. Because as you know, people come in to join a regular gym, if you will, and the top of mind is, I'm going to do a little cardio, do some light weights, and go home. And that's sort of what Planet Fitness based their whole model on, right? And they've done it really well. Well, to break that belief system and get people to say, well, wait a minute, if I really want to reach my goals, right, then I'm going to need to get some coaching, get some accountability, and get some workouts that are going to be a bit more maybe difficult or more effective than what I'm going to do on my own. And that takes a full-on commitment. So I would say operational commitment to the end game, which is to get a percentage of clients of your membership into training. In a big club, like in a low-cost club where you've got 15,000 members, if you can get 10% of your membership into training, you're absolutely on fire. If you're a smaller model, say you're a 24-hour convenience model and you have 1,000 members, 20% is a good penetration. So it really depends on the size and the price threshold and the volume. But some of our shining examples of doing a great job are clubs that are really high volume, $10 a month clubs who are selling at pre-sale, 1,000 memberships a month, and still getting 20% of those people to buy some type of, ascension into coaching, which is very difficult to do. And you can imagine the operational nightmare that creates, right? But here's the difference, and here's what I mean by operational. Some of our best operators would do things like the general manager of a club that has 17,000 members is going to meet with every personal trainer before every shift and go through their shift client over client and look for revenue opportunities. Hey, this client hasn't purchased supplements. This client only has 2 sessions left, so make sure you get those in this week. Imagine that level of operational commitment that the general manager of a club that big is meeting with every single personal trainer before every single shift. That alone, just that structure, basically tells your entire team that, yeah, we're selling memberships, but we're going to have to hustle for that. But that's almost an afterthought because we're going to put all of our efforts into upselling people into coaching, right? So that's on the large club side, and it does take a level of commitment to do that well. It's not going to sell itself. And then on the other end, for the studio operators, it's just, if you're not in a franchise model, you really need the operational business acumen. And that's where we see, you get the consummate technician that's a trainer person that, they've learned how to own their fitness and they're really smart. And all of a sudden they say, hey, my next thing is I want to teach other people how to exercise because it's changed my life. But yet they don't have any business acumen and maybe they don't have the right mindset for entrepreneurship. So for them, the challenge is going to be upskilling themselves from a business standpoint. Where the large club, it's going to be understanding the psychology and the importance of getting people to coaching. So it's almost like they have these diametrically opposed skill sets that they need to combine, right, in an ideal world.
Yeah, and it certainly sounds like on the bigger facilities, I guess from what you're saying and being someone that's I guess being a practitioner of this for a long time, it's probably, don't underestimate the amount of work that's involved. It's not just a case of coming to Escape and putting some great kit in there. That's nice, but
right.
The amount of effort that's required on a day-to-day level to make it work, I guess, is probably a lot more than most people may think.
Yeah, it's funny, and I know you knew this because you're fitting out spaces, and I'm sure there's been, at least we've heard this, expectations from equipment companies where you set up this beautiful space and then they might come to you and be like, hey, Matt, we're not making any money on this space. And it's like, well, you could buy a bunch of new treadmills. It doesn't mean your members are going to come running in the door, right? It's a very similar parallel. And so you're absolutely right. Like you have to be committed to all the steps it takes to do it. And it's funny, when we launched one brand that just made us look really smart. They were a high volume club and did some pretty gaudy numbers. And one of the big CRM companies in our industry would get the best of the best together periodically. They called it the Secret Fitness Society. So imagine if you were the best in the country you're the best in the US at personal training sales, they would bring all the heavy hitters that in their pipeline, and they're measuring numbers so they know who's doing what, in to visit this chain of clubs to see what they're doing, right? Because as the water rises, the ships rise. So hey, let's learn from this. Or you guys do an amazing supplement sales. Let's look at what you do, right? And so we would have all these clubs come in, and I would fly up there and explain what we were doing for them and why it was working so well. And it was like a 3-day seminar. And by the end of the 3 days, to your point, Matt, I remember standing, next to a couple of very dynamic owners who were successful in their own right. And I would say, so what do you guys think? And they would say, oh, I get it, but I'm not going to work that hard. Fair enough, right? But I think it's a little bit like weight loss. Like you either have to change your expectations or change your habits. But when you saw the level of operating intensity that it took to do $200,000 a month per club in reoccurring revenue for coaching services, it's not easy. And so I always appreciated someone who could look at that and say, like, yeah, that's great. Good for them. I'm not going to do that. I'll take my 50K a month and not work at it. I was like, okay, fair enough. It's like saying I don't want to lose weight. I'll stay 20 pounds overweight and I still want to drink a bottle of wine every night. Fair enough.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to do. Certainly for a lot of people we work with as well. I think you're better off. There's a lot of things within the industry, as you said at the very beginning, that are trends or fashionable, and everybody jumps on. But I think that's the problem in all businesses, even ours. You can kind of jump on this, what they call the shiny pennies, and you kind of half do it, but it doesn't quite work, and then it takes your eye off the ball of what you do well. And I suppose if you're really good, maybe, for example, low price operator that does an exceptional job, they're clean facilities, and maybe that's what you do. And maybe.
Well, and that particular individual, as an example, went on, the one that said, I don't want to work that hard, built something that was in their mind good enough. And I think they did maybe 30K a month in it, but a really high margin. But they went on to scale, 30, 40, 50 clubs. I think the principal owner sold 80% shares for 50 some million. So it's not like it's like you have to do it, but if you want to do it, you're going to have to work at it a little bit, right?
Yeah, like everything in life, I guess. So,
Yes.
so Rick, for people that haven't heard of you before, I think it'd be interested to give a little bit of a background. But in relation, if you can pull out maybe your sort of your I guess light bulb moments or your thought process, because you've evolved a lot. From what I hear, you used to be a personal trainer to Madonna. So you've sort of been sweeping the floors and starting at the bottom and work your way up. So just talk through your journey, but for anyone that's listening, those key moments that sort of made you realize, oh, okay, well, I've learned that now. Maybe this is a better direction to go, so we can sort of understand how you've progressed and why you've got to where you are today.
Great. I opened this original facility that I'm currently sitting in 1992. So I was a junior in college. That was 28 years ago. So, 28-year overnight success, right? So 28 years ago, and it was really, I was bouncing around. I was training people in their homes, and I was just paying my way through college, essentially, doing something I really love to do. I mean, personal training really wasn't even really an industry at the time. If you had a trainer in the early 90s, we laughed. It was a bit like having a tennis pro in the 80s, right? Where if you were a lady with a trainer, all the other ladies would be like, ooh, you were definitely having an affair, that type of thing. So we teased about it, but it wasn't really an industry at the time. And of course, we were first to market, which was great. And then we opened a facility dedicated to just training because I just didn't want to bounce around town. And I thought, well, wow, what if we put 4 walls around this and created a sort of a higher end customer experience? And I don't know if this is true because there was no Internet of Things or smartphones, certainly. And so we claimed to be one of the first facilities dedicated to just personal training. So we got along well. I mean, we opened in 92, we doubled our space. In 1998, we were doing $1 million a year in training, all one-on-one. Not great margins because I was paying subcontracted trainers, but still $1 million of personal training a year out of a 300 square meter or 3,000 square foot facility. In 1998, I look back on that was pretty good. And I thought I had it all figured out. And we had a couple of coaches that, again, them being self-employed legally, decided to go and open their own facility. And they held about 35% of my revenue. So they left. And then we had another things. I mean, I just wasn't running a tight ship. I was just sort of an artist, training some clients and bringing in heavy hitters that had their area of expertise. And it sort of blew up in my face. So I went, by 98, I was married, still am, had 2 young kids, had a mortgage. And I went from, $83,000 a month down to $12,000 a month. This happened in a matter of like 3 or 4 months, right? And so certainly I wasn't living a lavish lifestyle, but that was, if anything, a bruised ego. And so we decided, okay, we were going to scratch our way back and we're going to do this thing different. And that became the birth of a systemized approach to personal training. So it was definitely a crux move for us, meaning we own the experience. I have the lease, I have all the risk, I'm spending all the marketing money. I know how to best get people from point A to point B as far as helping them reach their fitness goals. So we're going to own our own process, which sounds laughable now, but at the time that just wasn't done. It was sort of an art, and it wasn't thought of as a systemized business. So we systemized everything from how we said hello, how we answered the telephone, how we did an assessment on someone, where they ended up in the programming. We then wrote the programs in a template format for the entire club, so the trainers weren't writing their own programs anymore. And lo and behold, our business took off again, and we doubled our space again and then doubled again. So that was our first crux move. And I would say the next one was when we were doing some consulting. We landed on this great model. We were doing a really high revenue per square foot. I was just starting to do some public speaking. And a Gold's Gym owner came into our gym and said, hey, can you take this thing and drop it into my gym to replace my personal training department? And at the time, it was like, they were those guys, we were these guys. That was sort of our stance. But we thought, that'd be an interesting challenge, and why not? I mean, we're sort of on autopilot at this point. So we did. We at the time, online platforms like LMS, learning management platforms, were just coming into being, and so we put all of our information on that. We launched it, and it went really well. And he was an influential owner in that brand. And lo and behold, fast forward to the end of 2018, and we were in over 2,000 clubs worldwide, and had built white labeled versions for big franchise brands, and had several thousand clubs in those brands, and we're everywhere from Cyprus to Tasmania and everything in between. And so that was a crux move. And again, if you look at this, it's not like this was a planned event, right? Neither was the near miss and almost out of business. So I'd love to say that this was all part of a master plan the whole time, but it really took either someone almost running me out of business or someone coming in my gym and beating me over the head with it. I'd like to think that we were open to change, right? And we had a mindset that would allow us to see opportunities and take advantage of them, but never did we have this as part of a 5-year or 10-year or 20-year plan. It just happened. And then, last year we decided, instead of powering everyone else's franchise, we're going to do our own. And so we pivoted. Took about 8 months to build the franchise out. And we started selling franchising in October of 2019. So just last year.
Right.
And sold 7 right out of the gate before COVID. And then now we're back on it.
So what you've done, you've made that change, which makes a lot of sense. Doing it yourselves because you've got a lot of experience, and obviously you're more in control of your own destiny. The interesting thing, though, that you've done is as opposed to just going in and sort of doing probably what you've done before as a concept, you've been very sort of focused on a specific demographic, from what I understand. So what sort of how did you get to that point, and what was some of the logic behind that decision?
Yeah, so when we really took a step back and thought, okay, instead of powering everyone else's franchise, let's do our own. So we had to sort of put a flag in the ground. Right now, what's the landscape look like? And when we looked around with all the clubs that we work with and consulted with, we saw that the group training studios, overall, the price, it was a lot of saturation, right? I mean, you're like the 36th guy to come out with a hit franchise these days. And I'm not saying it's bad, but there's a lot of competition out there. The big ones are, Orange Theory, F45. I mean, you could put a new skin on it, but it's sort of a group of people getting sweaty and, getting their heart rate up. And so I felt like, all right, if we're going to do what's next, then we should probably do something a bit different. And let's get back to our core competency. So one thing that we started doing was personal training when we first opened in 92. And we really learned how to scale it so that we could put up to 6 people with one coach with the right technology around it and still make the elevator claim, right? We're going from floor 1 to 5. Hey, what's the difference between you and Orange Theory? Easy. They do classes, we do personal training, and still make that claim. Well, the price threshold is much higher. So if you look at the average price of a boot camp in our market, again, it's probably $129 a month, right? Well, our average price point is $280 a month. The average stay of a customer for a boot camp brand, and how do we know this? Because we're working with them. We're working with the franchise level as well, is 3 to 7 months. So what's the lifetime value of a customer at $129 a month for 6 months? If you look at our business, it's almost $300 a month for 36 months average stay. And so, okay, so we have a $10,000 lifetime value. You have a $600 lifetime value, let's just say. Um, I can outspend you for customer acquisition cost all day long, right? Because there is a formula for profitability and how much you can spend to acquire a new customer. So I can beat everyone in my market, regardless of how saturated it is, because I can simply outspend them because my lifetime value of a customer is so much higher. And it's something we just do well. And as you know, Matt, what you're getting to about age is when you get your price threshold up a little bit, I'm selling to guys like me. I'm 50 now. And so it's like, all right, I get it, but finally you've amassed enough wealth in your life to be able to afford a nice car or some nice things. That's not the typical avatar for a boot camp brand. They're going 25 to 35, maybe female mostly. And we're still, we're 45 to 65, maybe even a bit older at times. Entrepreneurs, movers and shakers, travel for business. These are smart consumers and they want scientific, they want specificity, they want to pay a little bit more. Some of that psychology about paying more and then you value it more, all of that plays into it. So we just saw a gap in the market that wasn't one-on-one training, which is not that scalable, but it wasn't another, lipstick on the pig of group training. I'm not saying those are bad, but you get what I'm saying. So I felt like, all right, I don't want to be the 50th guy with a hit franchise. So let's come out with something that's different, that's personal training, but it's scalable, more affordable. And we can target this age demographic that holds 70% of our nation's disposable income. And supposedly the marketing dollars spent there are only in the 5 to 7% range because it's just not sexy, right? But it doesn't really matter. Making money is also sexy.
It is. And it's,
It is.
I don't know whether many people think about it, but it's a very smart way of looking at the lifetime value of the customer. Because I guess in an industry where the challenge has always been, how do you retain your members? I think we all go to so many of these industry events and seminars, and it's always up there. How do you retain more members? And I suppose if you kind of get your financial model right, and the business model right, then you're right. It suddenly starts to make sense. But it sounds like the big challenges that the industry's got, which is, how do you attract more people into the facility, because we still seem to be stuck around that same sort of percentage, and how do you keep them longer? It sounds like you've been able to sort of build that into your model. So what's made you different then from a lot of the people that are still trying to get to that nirvana state then within their business?
Yeah, I don't know, honestly. I mean, I think it's just it's probably a bit of that's a good question. I'm trying to figure out a way to label this. Maybe imposter syndrome is a good way. I'm sure you've gotten this. I've know a little bit about your journey as well, and you've done amazing work since I've even seen you. And there are times when you sort of take stock of where you are and who you're directing and your level of influence, and it's humbling, but it's also scares the shit out of you at the same time, right? And you feel like, wow, like someone's going to find out, like the jig is up, right? Like, someone's going to uncover that I really don't know what I'm doing and I'm on the hairy edge of my ability level. And for me, that's a driving force to always level up, right? So, I mean, I've taken more business courses since I have been out of college than I ever did in college, and certainly paid more attention. So, I've taken several Harvard online business courses, and I just feel like you just have to keep leveling up and acquiring skill sets. And some of that is at the expense of the person that you were before. You have to you've heard this a million times, right? You have to kill your old identity to recreate yourself over and over and over again. And I think that's just more of a mindset. And so I feel like that's probably my only superpower, is that I'm humble enough to admit that I don't know as much as I would like to. And I'm constantly pursuing more. But I also have a little bit of competitive streak where if I see someone doing it, and I say, well, if that person can do it, I can probably do it. I mean, they can't be that much smarter than me. They just have a skill set that I don't. So I'll acquire those skills and I'll screw it up and I'll fix it and keep moving till we figure it out. And I think that's always been my mentality, and that helps, So I'm always probably a little bit more humble than I need to be. I could probably boast a little bit more, but it's just not my style. But that also keeps me hungry and it keeps me learning all the time. How about you? I mean, I'd love to hear how about you? Because you've progressed through all these different stages, certainly in a really a short period of time. So what would you attribute that to for you?
I think I certainly, from what I understand from you, you've probably got a lot more up here in terms of your data and analysis skills than what I have. I tend to sort of probably, I don't know, I wasn't particularly, well, I was terrible at school in most subjects. But I guess what I've always had is just that work ethic. And so I probably just think, well, I'm going to have to work twice as hard to sort of keep up with anyone. And a bit like you, yeah, I didn't like learning at school when I left. I'm a passionate learner. Every week I'm trying to sort of listen to some new idea, business or what have you. So yeah, I think just the hard work and the interest in trying to acquire new skills is probably what I sort of use. I guess if that answers
Yeah,
the question.
it does. And you're super creative, right? Because I can't do what you do. I can't envision a beautiful space and how to put a suite of equipment together, because there's a real art to that, right? Because you can see a two similar spaces set up that seemingly will accomplish the same thing, but one looks really bland and one looks like it's alive, right? And that's sort of what, for I guess at least from crop duster height, that's what it looks like you've done really well, and that's certainly a skill set that not a lot of people possess.
Well, one of the subjects that I'm fascinated about, mainly because I'm literally a few weeks away from this sort of big 5-0. And when I say it now, I'm like I'm sort of looking in the mirror and like, do I look like I should do? Do I look better? Do I look worse? And it's a real. I'm sure it's one of the things that everybody sort of struggles with. But yeah, I'm about to enter this age, and so I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about what you've found in terms of that sort of over 50. Let's call them over 50 groups. Why is it an interesting opportunity that we should think about, and what are some of the things about the over 50s? Because like I say, I imagine a sort of grey-haired person, not that I've got hair, so I've been able to avoid that, but it doesn't sound sexy, although I like to feel sexy. I like to feel as I was when I was 30. So why are these people important, and what sort of things are they interested in? Because that are probably different to how people would imagine that group of people is.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, because what we knew right away, and which has really played out to be true, is it's really tricky to market old, right? And so there's two fronts. As you know, we're trying to market a franchise to a potential investor, and then we're trying to help that investor market their services to their local market, right? Their local neighborhood gym, if you will. And so they're marketing to their market. And you cannot go B2C, business to consumer marketing, with old, because no one thinks they're old. I can even remember when we first were talking about the concept, and I was talking about a potential investor, and he was in Greenwich, Connecticut. He had been on Wall Street for years, and he was 60 years old, but he was an A player, hard charger, liked sports cars, was in great shape. So we're talking about this demographic, and to me, he's the ideal avatar, right? Like, we do these archetypes of clients, and there's different characters, if you will, and there's like movers and shakers, and that was one of the big ones, right? And that's like an entrepreneur who's financially independent, but yet when he starts hearing that we're targeting this older age group, he says to me, "Oh, so it's for older people." And of course, I didn't have the heart to be like, no, it's for you and for me, by the way, right? But to your point, marketing old is not a good idea. I mean, it's just not. I think I posted last year, right before we launched the franchise, I posted my only ever shirtless picture on Instagram. And I'm in great shape. I mean, my body fat's like 8.5%. I'm 225 pounds. I've got abs. It's like, if you cut my head off, I look like a 30-year-old, right? I'm that creepy guy in the back of the magazines that's like 100 years old with a 30-year-old body. But I'm fighting it, right? And I don't want to work out in an old person's gym either. I'm just like you. I just turned 50. I turned 51 here in a few months. So we're roughly the same age. So I wouldn't go to a gym like that. I want to go and try to keep up with guys in their 20s, right? That type of thing. So when you look at this crowd, the reason that they're relevant is because they have this disposable income. They're smart consumers. They want to pay more. They don't want to be just one of the crowd, but they certainly don't want to feel old. I mean, these are people that they drive expensive cars, they play golf, they take great adventure trips, they ski, they travel the world, they consider themselves young and sexy and all the things that you and I consider ourselves, right? I mean, true or not, whatever. So all that being said, the real key is to think about premium, right? So think about the brand of like a Porsche. So, and I know you're a car guy. I've seen some of your cool cars, right? Well, cars are awesome. Like, what person doesn't like, nice sports cars? It's like everyone, right? But there's not a lot of 25-year-olds walking into that dealership buying a Maserati or an Aston Martin. There's just not. If you looked at their average demographic, it's going to be people probably early 40s up into their 60s and 70s. Well, that's our demographic, but we're not selling to them old. We're just selling premium. So think smart, scientific, specificity. Don't do what the masses do. You're special. Come in and do this. You're smarter than that, right? That's how you capture. So if I came to you and said, listen, I've got this super scientific way. We're going to bring you in. We're going to do this movement screen. It's going to be very specific to you, and it's very scientific. And this is what professional athletes do, which is true, by the way. You're going to be like, yeah, that's for me, right? Because you have a certain ego around looks and, feeling young and fit. That's the way to do it. So it's a little bit of a trick. Now, B2B, it makes sense. I can tell somebody, hey, this is an untapped market. Every other fitness brand is chasing 30-year-old hot moms. Go after people 45 and up, right? Because they're a bit underserved, but you have to be smart in the way you do it. And even in your marketing pictures, we made the mistake of going a little bit too old, even in some of our imaging. So now we've gone back to more aspirational. And it's okay to show people in their 40s, 50s, or whatever, but they better be fit, and they better be someone who I would want to aspire to look like, right? Or doing an activity that I would aspire to do. And so that's really the key. It's a great, relevant market financially, but you really have to make sure you don't market old, or you're going to lose guys. I want guys like you. You're the perfect customer for my business, but if I go old, I'm going to lose you all day long.
Yeah, and that's right. And I think, I've never thought about the sort of automotive industry, but if you think about it, most of the premium brands that we all know, you're right, certainly where I am, the average age of people are like, they're older than my dad. But that, I suppose what they're doing is they're making those people feel young again. That car makes them feel like they were when they're 30, when they couldn't afford it, I suppose. So but they, they obviously do it in a very sophisticated way where you don't get that sort of sense of age. Even my dad, he's I guess a prime person for them. But yeah, it's interesting. I like the way you say that. Marketing premium as opposed to old. It's
You just have to be smart, scientific. I mean, if you're marketing a Porsche, right, it's about performance and horsepower, and yes, it looks sexy and it's amazing, but you have to pay to play, and there's some status around that. So if you want to be a status brand, right? I mean, you don't drive a Porsche around if you're broke. If you do, you might, but you know what I mean, right? There's a certain status. I mean, we live in a great area for really twisty roads, right? We're maybe a couple hours from a famous road called Tail of the Dragon, and there's just turns and curves everywhere. So there are so many sports car clubs out of Atlanta that you'll see in the mountains, and it's like, there'll be 20 Lamborghinis or 14, 15 Porsches, and they all meet up, and then they drive up to the mountains and race around the curves as fast as they can. And I'm a motorcycle guy, so I'm up there. I might be in a Ducati club or BMW or all the same thing. Same bikes. Bikes have the same kind of connotation, right? But when you see the guys stop and get out of the car, they're all older guys. I mean, they're all my age and older. Now they're fit, and you can tell they're A players, and they're probably successful business people, right? But they still want to feel cool and sexy, man. That's what it's all about. So there's a real magic to being able to do both, like to service them well. I mean, if you put them in a CrossFit type of environment, they're probably going to be competitive. They're probably going to get hurt and do something stupid. So there's a way to do it in a smart way, still train them in a way that's going to keep them there for that 36-month average, but also making it feel sexy and not old. And there's a brand that just opened close to my gym, and it's called like 55 and Fit or something. I think it's a one-off. That's not the title, but I won't call them out. But I went in there the other day, and it was so tired and so old. And I'm in their age demographic, right? And I just thought, oh, I mean, the person at the desk was like 100 years old, and they showed me some machine that would help me with my bone density, and I'm standing there like, probably in better shape than their kids. And I'm thinking, man, this is just a swing and a miss, right? So, yeah, tricky.
Yeah. So when we're just staying on the marketing side for the moment, what have you found as being effective marketing tools and some of the strategies you've got? Because I guess how do you kind of reach these people effectively, and what are they sort of into tech as an example? Do they use Facebook and Instagram and all that sort of stuff, or what if you're obviously being successful at bringing them in the doors, but what vehicles and creative are you having to use to both male and female, and do the apps and that sort of thing change depending on who you're targeting?
Yeah, I think the tech is the same. I mean, certainly this crowd, look at yourself, super tech savvy. So any kind of tech is well received. We have an app as well, and we have most of our customers have second homes. So again, it's like, okay, I'm in my tell your ride home for the summer. It's like, okay, great. Well, I don't want to lose that revenue, and you've worked really hard to get here, so we're going to design you some workouts to do on the app, right? And it's not like we're old where people are like, what's an app? I don't have a smartphone. I'm still on the jitterbug. We don't have that kind of stuff. It's really guys like you and I, or girls, right? Same thing. So we still find digital advertising to be the most effective. And our age demographic does spend a lot of time on Facebook, especially females. And so we do a lot of digital advertising on Facebook. We do Google ads as well. And we'll, obviously it's a dark art just to be good at that, right? And so split testing different ads with different creatives. And surprisingly, we might run an ad with someone who is relatively unfit and we'll get really good traction with it. So we'll go with it, right? But we'll also run, an A player. Like we've got a guy who's in amazing shape. He's 60 years old, but he just looks amazing, right? He's a pilot, and he's also an entrepreneur and owns a couple of tech companies. I mean, he's the guy that everybody would want to be. And he's got 4 sons that all look like Supermen. It's like this guy's the real life Incredibles family, right? And we use him in some of our advertising, and he does really well. And then we use the same thing. Like his wife is a prime example of someone who would fit in. So it's really digital mostly, but we can use all the tech tools we want because this crowd is very tech savvy and use tech regularly. And yeah, I mean, other than that, just kind of go where they go, right? So like we do a lot of like community outreach for like golf clubs. Again, we'll do cross promotions with luxury cars. I mean, there is a Ferrari dealership, a Range Rover dealership, a Porsche dealership, Aston Martin dealership, all within 3 miles of my mothership club. So we'll do cross promotions with them even because our customers are the same customers, right? And so they might do some kind of special test drive set up for our clients that we would advertise to our clients just through one of the sales guys. And then they may run something where they've got alloy signage in the showroom there because we have those light customers. So I think if you want to do some local guerrilla marketing, just go where your customers are, where they shop, right? And spend time cross promoting with those businesses. And then other than that, it's 99% digital through Facebook and Google. As an example, like a Google title that we would use, Matt, would be like, do you want to be one of a million or one in a million, right? It's sort of that mentality, right? Like, don't go do what all the other people are doing. Like, you're different, you're better than that, right? That kind of mentality, if that makes sense. I mean, you look at I look at you, I'm like, all right, this guy's super cool. He's an entrepreneur. He's doing his own thing. He's got a really dope podcast. He's got some badass cars. He's in great shape. It's like, okay, like you know what I mean? That's what we're trying to create is like that lifestyle, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it
So
doesn't mean you're not inclusive. We still get people that are out of shape and we can scientifically accommodate them all day, but we're trying to be as aspirational as possible.
So I was listening to a previous podcast you did, and it was certainly information I didn't know. But and maybe this is sort of a little bit out of date now. But you were talking about the sort of spend, the marketing spend through the different age groups, as opposed, the younger millennials, as opposed to the sort of over 45s, for example. And I guess everybody's, or a lot of people are probably targeting those younger millennials. But what are have you got anything that's sort of relatively up to date in terms of why, how much people are spending and why that's such a great, investment really in that age group?
Yeah. So when you look at, if you like you brought up digital advertising as an example, so you would be surprised to know that the millennials, which is now up to almost 40, right, somewhere in that range, but is in that sort of avatar for most of the boutique fitness brands. They do spend money online, and they do spend a disproportionately large percentage of their income on fitness, but it pales in comparison to the total amount spent on health and fitness by the 50 plus crowd, right? So it's like if you're making, $40,000 a year and you're spending a larger percentage, that doesn't mean anything to me. If you're making $3 million a year, of course it's going to be a smaller percentage, but the vast amount of money is so much greater, right? That's spent there. So I think the numbers get a little bit skewed with how much people spend in different categories. And so even online, I think it was 5x. I have a whole presentation on this, but it's escaping me right now. But it's 5x as much money spent online, like purchases online. So you think like, oh, why would you market 50 plus? Well, they have the money and they have the time and they're on social media. They're spending as much time on social media, more on a like a laptop or what have you than a mobile comparatively to the younger crowd. But still, they spend as much time online, and when they do, they're buying more stuff online. So online advertising, you've got someone who's spending more time on there, right, or as much time, and they have the financial wherewithal to buy whatever they want. So it's not like they're not tech savvy and you have to send them a mailer or a newspaper ad. It's like, what are we doing? I mean, these folks are online. The fastest growing segment of Facebook population is women over 55. So, it's a great place to hang out. And these folks have the money and will buy whatever they want, and they buy online. So they buy twice as many things online. So you'd be really surprised to dig into that data on this 50 plus
Mm.
crowd, how much money they spend in these technological channels that you would assume would only be dedicated to a younger crowd. Not true.
And I also heard you saying again, it might have been a sort of a 6-month-old interview that you did, but the percentage that people also spend to market to that over 50s is a lot less as an amount. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, the report that we pulled was from 2018, and it stated that only 5% of marketing dollars are spent on the over 50 crowd. So imagine that. You've got the crowd that holds 70% of the disposable income in the United States, and that's only growing, right? I mean, your wealth is only growing year over year, and only 5% of marketing dollars are spent there. I think the reason is it goes back to what you and I talked about, right? How do you market to old people, which, no offense, and you're about to be there, but right, how do you
Thank you.
market relevantly to old people, right, in air quotes, without being tired and old and turning them off? That's what people are not able to do right now. And so I think it's, they think they market young and sexy and that's going to bring them in, but I think they're missing the boat. I mean, it's a massive opportunity for any business, much less just fitness.
Yeah, that's right. It sounds like it. Why do you think then that more people, more businesses across the sector don't look at that? Because it's, if you look at and I spent quite a bit of time looking into some of the numbers you said, and I won't go into them just because these things change, but I would recommend people look into it. But it was sort of thumped me straight on the nose, where I thought, damn, why aren't we looking at this, for example? But why as it's such an obvious one? Why don't you think more people are looking at that? Is it because it isn't sexy and they imagine them as being these sort of unattractive group to work with, or what? Because a lot of brands are really, some brands are doing very well, but I guess in our sector they're probably not.
Yeah, I mean, you look at I think that's what it is. I think people, it might be a little bit of an ego. Like, I don't want to own a brand that services old people, right? But if I said, do you want to own a brand that services this guy? And I had a picture of you working out in your driveway with your, sports cars behind you, they're going to be like, yeah, that's a guy I want. I'm like, well, then that guy's 50 years old, by the way. He looks amazing, but he's 50. So I don't really, I think it's a disconnect between what older means, right? I mean, look at the
Mm.
difference now. I heard someone the other day talk about the difference between, do you remember the old sitcom Golden Girls? Where it was just like a group of
Yes,
old ladies that
very.
had moved to
Yeah.
Florida, right? Yeah, and it's still played all over the world. It's still a favorite in like these countries that don't get our TV shows for like 10 years or something. So, but it's basically a group of old ladies, and they all moved down to Florida, and they're very matronly and they're funny, but they're like a group of like divorced and or widowed grandmothers, right? Well, the one of the lead ladies in the group, while during that time when they were filming it, was 50 years old, and she looks to me like a 75-year-old lady, right? So that wasn't that long ago. This was filmed maybe 20, 25 years ago. Well, then you contrast that with like J Lo, who's like super sexy at 50 years old. There's plenty of people that are 25 or 30 who would trade all day long her, with her body. And so it's like in this day and age, I think it's maybe we're just slow to catch up to what does it mean to be 50 or 55. I mean, it certainly isn't what it meant 20 years ago, right? And so I
No.
think there's just a disconnect. It's like we go straight from young and vitality to silver sneakers, and you're 85 years old, and there's this huge gap in between that I think we just miss out on. So I don't know why. I mean,
Mm.
I'm like you. It's baffling. It's like such a massive opportunity, and we've done a really good job servicing that crowd organically for all these years. It's always been our biggest line item of revenue has always been personal training. So it's like, well, why don't we just do that? I mean, there's a massive opportunity here. It's a sort of an untapped area of the market if you can hit it right and not swing too old and miss the mark, right? So I don't know.
Mm.
It's a great question. I think it's just people don't get it. I think they think, people are too old. Maybe I'm just fortunate enough to be that age and not feel that old. So I'm like, well, shit, we're not old. let's do this.
Yeah.
If I was 30, I might be like, I don't want a gym that services 50-year-old people. They're old.
Maybe because it's a fairly young industry, and it's seen to be young and youthful, and maybe that just goes with the package. But I guess it's good. You're probably pleased that not too many people are thinking about that in the moment. There's more opportunity
Yeah,
for you there.
there's a lot of lip service around it. Like if you go to, there was an article written by Ursa that like 15 people must have forwarded it to me last week, and it was all about how to get the active aging crowd back in the gym. Again, the photos were all of people who looked extremely old, but I think everyone, again, they get it. They see the same metrics that you and I see, but then they miss the mark, right? Like even the images are like, well, that's not what it is, right? It's not that. It's the guy who's 55 or the lady who's 55 who looks like a 35-year-old did, in the 70s. Like that's the person we're going for. Now, that doesn't mean that person still doesn't have challenges. And you can probably attest to this. Like if you get any miles on your body and you've been active in your life, you have some chinks in your armor. You might have a knee that bothers you, or a bum shoulder, but you want to keep going and you want to work around that. But if you take that body that has 50 years of activity on it, even if it looks amazing, and you throw it into this ridiculously hard workout that would churn through 20-year-olds, right, and injure them, you're not going to have a lot of longevity. So there is still that factor where you have to be really smart and scientific about the way that you service these folks, or you're going to get them hurt. And a great way to do that is in a setting where you can accommodate injuries and fitness levels, where you can't, when it's a one size fits all, come in and try a workout. And if you can survive it, great.
Does that require you as an operator to have, in terms of the skills of the people that you're bringing in? Do you need to have better quality instructors, and do you need to pay them better to service that type of audience? And is that also part of the way you differentiate yourself?
Not so much. We try to stay out of the sort of rock star trainer, arena, which is what almost sunk me in '98 even. And we systemize everything. So imagine having a system where, Matt, you come in the door, we do this type of assessment, and there's algorithms that say if this, then that, if this, then that, if this, then that. And then we know, like we have our philosophies around programming and how people should exercise, and whether strength is more important than cardio in this age bracket. And there's a lot of things like that scientifically we lean into. But at the end of the day, we're all kind of the same. It's just about applying the right level of our philosophies to that individual. So the way that we do it is a coach comes in, they have an app, they open it up, it has 6 tiles on the app, and it's automatically populated from the schedule. And it says, and here's Matt's tile. Matt's a power level client, which in our terms is advanced. Here's what he wants to work on. Here's the injuries. He's got a bum shoulder, so we're not going to do this thing right now. And then they toggle over, and here's the template. And the template has the levels built into it and the alternatives for the different injuries. So you can hire the right athlete of a coach. And in our case, it's someone who's outgoing, they look the part, they have energy. It's someone that people would like to have a beer with, right? But everything else is handled. Like, here's your client, here's your template. Just marry them together based on these algorithms, right? And so it makes scaling and coaching highly scientific programs much easier, but there's a real system behind that.
Yeah, sounds like it. What's the retention like of people that are older compared to younger? Like my guess is that sort of when I was in the 20s, you're moving around and you're kind of going with friends and girlfriends and all that sort of stuff. Is it is when you're older? Is there sort of more of a is it more natural to be a little bit more loyal for these facilities because you are a little bit more settled than when you're younger?
100%. So there's something in the franchise documents called an item 19, and that's where you disclose any financial information that you want, right? It's typically things that make your brand look compelling, but you have to back them up with data. So one of ours is we have the highest retention rate of any brand in the industry in the studio space. So I'm on the board for Association of Fitness Studios, so we've got access to all of their data, right? And the average retention for a studio model on average is 82% a month. So if you extrapolate that over 12 months, you're churning out 18% of your clients every single month. So you can see that you're turning over nearly 100% of your clients, right, before year's end. Whereas in ours, we have a 97% retention. So that much higher. So we're only churning out 3% a month on average. And so if you look at our example, our average stay of a customer is 36 months, right? Theirs is 3 to 7 months. So again, it goes back to that lifetime value. Like if the acquisition cost is going to be similar on the front end for that same customer, do I want to have them for 3 to 7 months at $129 a month, or do I want to have them for 36 months at $300 a month, right? So it's a simple answer, but absolutely 100%, whether it's the price threshold, the target demographic, the extra attention that they get in a personal training model, the fact that we can work around injuries and pivot, say someone goes skiing in Aspen and they tear their ACL. It's like, we don't have a one trick pony exercise, protocol where if they can't run on a treadmill, they can't come in. It's like, oh no, we can work around that. No sweat. We'll just do single leg exercises for your leg that works, and we'll keep your core in shape so that you can snap back quicker. And let's focus on some upper body goals right now. And all that can be done in that construct of that 6-person small group that I talked about.
And what about virtual? So I guess my guess is, and I don't know, it's probably a question, but have your facilities been closed down during this period, or have you managed to stay open? Yeah, you have.
We were closed. We did.
Right.
We did close. So we were forced to close. Now, our state was a little bit cavalier. I mean, you're in California now, right? Yeah. So you guys have had it pretty rough. As you know, we still have our licensing revenue that we're servicing. And so we've got some clubs out there, and I feel bad for those guys. But in Georgia, at least in Atlanta, we were one of the first to reopen. So we were lucky. So we were shut for about 8 weeks. Now, during that time period, we pivoted immediately to virtual. And here's the great thing about a personal training brand is that if you're streaming classes, as an example, so a lot of the studio models they pick their rock star instructors and they were streaming classes throughout the day, and typically using Zoom or some other platform to do so, right? And that was okay for the people that were already in your gym if you wanted to keep them engaged, at least for that period of time that you were closed. But to have a viable virtual product, you really need to do it. You're really doing it in a one-on-one setting. You're just servicing it virtually. So what we were able to do then, because we had coaches on staff already, is to put clients into buckets, right? Like here's 100 clients, and Matt, these are your clients, and here's the virtual playbook. And we have the app that already drives that. So the app pulls in MyFitnessPal. They can track the intensity of workouts. We can see whether they completed a workout or not. You can give them small incremental goals, like drink a glass of water a day, and they could just check yes or no whether they did it. And so we had a playbook, but we really tidied it up, and it was easy to do quickly. Divided the clients up into buckets, gave every coach a bucket, and said, run this play with each client. And so it was mostly we're selling accountability and nutrition coaching, and then sending them workouts that they could do at home. But as you know, you can get workouts from anywhere to do at home. It was really about a live individual that knew your name and was saying, hey, Matt, why didn't you work out today? I didn't see the check that came through, right? It's like, damn it. So it became one-on-one training serviced virtually, and we were able to keep all of our revenue. So one thing that we disclosed in that financials for the item 19, because people are scared of fitness right now. If you're an investor, you're like, fitness looks scary, right? For COVID. It's like, well, here's our item 19 retention numbers, which were great during COVID. So we can say, hey, we've got a relevant product for that. But I think moving forward, you have to have some digital assets to be virtual. It's just the nature of the beast. I know you had Alex on here, and he's been lucky enough to call this thing hybrid. He's like, I was on this 8 months ago. I'm like, you didn't know there was a virus coming, so we tease him about that. And he's like, yeah, but I look really smart now. I'm like, okay, you look pretty smart. But if you have the digital assets to go virtual, you should. But I don't think it's really sustainable to just drive classes, because if you're going to do that, you could do Peloton, Tonal, Mirror. I mean,
Apple,
I don't know, free stuff. Apple. I mean, yeah, come on, like anybody, right? So there's so many ways to stream content. It's really about a real individual on the other end of that content who's holding you accountable to it. And that's really going to be the key moving forward if you want to monetize it well.
Yeah. So a couple of questions before we wrap up. But first, it would be great to give a bit of an overview of, if people want to find you, what, are you still speaking? What's your franchise? Where do people go? Just, opportunity to tell everybody about, how to get in touch with you, really.
Yeah. So just go to alloypersonaltraining.com. From there, I'm all over social media. We do a podcast as well. It's pretty tactical. It's just all about the business of personal training. Or you can find me anywhere. And I still am doing events. Obviously, all of the events are live, not live. They're all virtual this year. So I did one for Perform Better. I have one coming up. I did one last week. I have one coming up for Association of Fitness Studios in a couple of weeks. I'm doing a couple of keynotes, but they're all done virtually. So you can find me though, and we always, if that's coming up, we'll always be advertising on our social media channels, or certainly on my personal channels. It'll be in there.
Excellent. So where do you see things in the next sort of, I guess, 18 to 24 months then? What's your, you know, you have great experience with a number of different models, but what do you see some of the winners and the losers, and do you see things probably just going back to normal, but people doing them just a little bit better, or do you see any sort of major shifts that we should, outside of what we've just spoken about with the opportunity in the over 50s, but is there anything else that you think is gonna be different or worth watching?
I think the low cost model will continue to do well. If you look at Planet Fitness's numbers during COVID, they were strong. I think that's going to come back because the price threshold is just so low and they own it. They do a good job of it. So I think that gym does well. I think the mid-priced health club's still going to struggle a bit, right? Just because of, the price point, and they're kind of stuck in that no man's land in the middle. I see boot camp brands struggling a bit, whether it be consumer confidence over COVID, but cramming a lot of people into a really small space is probably not ideal right now, whether it's literally government restrictions or just consumer confidence. So I like a pivot to what we're doing. And again, a bit like Alex, we were joking, we were kind of onto this as a competitive, advantage, trying to fill a gap, if you will. But as it turns out, it's really compelling coming out of COVID as well. So we've helped many clubs that we work with from a licensing standpoint that were boot camp businesses transitioning to small group training. So higher average return per member, and actually it's just fewer people in your space at one time, so that they feel more
And
confident.
With small group, what's the number that you use to define small group then? Was it like 1 to 5 or
1 to 6? And believe me,
1 to
we've
6,
tried
right?
everything. It started out as partner training, which was 2. For a long time, we were at 4 because we also had team training under the same roof. So we were working to differentiate those 2 services. And then once we eliminated team training and shrunk the facility to just do small group, we could go to 6. Anything beyond 6, in our experience, is that you just can't make the claim of personal training any longer. It just feels too class oriented. So I would say up to 6. And if I was an individual coach that was doing one-on-one training, this is where I would go, because I can scale my business quicker. I can help more people, make more money, right? People pay less, I make more. Good thing, right? If I was a boot camp business, I would scale to this as well. I mean, if you're working around restrictions right now and you are a brand that squeezes 24 people into 2,500 square feet, and you're now allowed to be at half capacity, you can do that. I just don't understand how that works with the business model and the pricing structure that you have, right? Long term, if you have to stay there. So I would say look to make more money off of less people as a studio model. And if you're in a big club model, good luck to you. I'd rather be at the low end of the price point.
Yeah, that's right. So, final question then, Rick. Escape Your Limits is about escaping what you've believed is impossible and gone on to make it possible. Outside of some of the fantastic things that you've done recently and we spoke about today, what would be a memorable example of escaping your own personal limits?
I would say we had someone that made a run at an acquisition of our business, right? And so imagine a big company that does really good work in the space was making a run to acquire us. And of course, we talk about that imposter syndrome, right? Where sometimes you're at a table and you look around and you think, what am I doing here? They're going to, hopefully no one will ask me to speak because they're going to find out that I don't know what I'm talking about. But all kidding aside, maybe you've earned your way there, right? So we're at a table there, and our meeting's running over, and we're negotiating the final deal points on whether or not we're going to sell wholly. And someone knocks on the door, and it's someone who's letting the next person into the meeting. And they say, hey, so-and-so's here early. I know you guys are running over. Can they come on in? And the folks I'm meeting with are like, yeah, come on in. Have a seat. So I'm looking at this person. I'm like, I know this person. I know this guy from somewhere. Well, it turns out it's the guy Robert from Shark Tank. I don't even remember Robert's last name, but you've watched Shark Tank, right?
Yeah.
So the guy with the beautiful hair, right? So he's in the room now, and we're working on a deal, and I'm like, this is really strange. Am I getting Shark Tank? Like, what's going on here, right? And so, great. And then a few moments go by, and there's another knock at the door because we're still running over, and now we're rebel rousing with Robert from Shark Tank, and this other guy walks in, and it turns out it's Wozniak from Apple. I'm like, oh, hey man, what's up? It's like, you're right. So here's this, and of course, Apple's working on these fitness initiatives, and all these other folks are investing, and they're talking strategy, right? So I'm like, okay, like I'm definitely way in over my head here. And the deal wasn't a good deal. So, basically at the end of the day, it was like, no deal, and of course I leave the office, and you can just picture this in a movie, Matt. I'm walking down the hall from this ivory tower conference room on my way to fly home. And I'm like, I'm a lone wolf, baby. I cannot be bought. You know what I mean? Like, I got this. And of course, that was one of those moments when I thought, yeah, I really had, life by the balls, so to speak. But here's the funny part. And here's the life of an entrepreneur, and you'll get this. So I still own my brick and mortar gyms, even though I'm not in them very often. So I fly home that evening. I get home at like 9 or 10 o'clock. I'm still feeling like, the best thing since sliced bread, right? Because I said no to this. I mean, basically retirement money, but it just had a long earn out. I didn't want to do it. And I just thought, I'll be going to make money forever. I don't want to do this, right? So the very next morning, I wake up early and I wake up to a call, and it's from one of my gyms that's been open for 30 years. You can imagine how much I even want to be involved with a gym that's been open 30 years, as much as I love it. It's like, and it turns out that we have a college intern who's in his 20s who's working at my desk, who's sending basically pictures of his private parts to a high school girl in my gym. And it's my manager, and they're like, hey, we have a problem. How should I handle this? And I'm like, I went from the tip top, right? I'm rubbing elbows with the top guys saying no, and to right back and eating the entire humble pie all at one time by dealing with pics of some dude's genitals in my gym. I'm like, and I just had to sit down and just laugh. I laughed until I cried. I'm like, this is my life right now. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, life slaps you and tells you that you don't. But I think it's good for everyone. So I would say that's one of those moments for me when I thought, wow, I really have this figured out, only to realize in less than 12 hours that I did not. And I have to admit, I almost picked up the phone and called him and said, never mind, I'll take the deal.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, what have I done?
Change it. I'll take the deal. I can't do this shit anymore. I'm done, all kidding aside. But we did the right thing. We made the right decision. Great guys. It was good. It was great working with them. And, I do find that story hilarious. And it's probably just a small snapshot of what a life of an entrepreneur looks like. But yeah, I would say that's probably the moment. Yeah, you get it, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, Rick, thank you so much for sharing so much for us. I think there's some great lessons there, and I think for companies that are looking at where to go next, I certainly when I was researching this, it kind of gave me a lot of fantastic ideas and some great inspiration. When you think that all the doors are closed and the world's falling in, then you hear what you guys are doing, and I think it's it's very motivating and encouraging. So thank you for all you've done. I recommend people check out your podcast, which I've done, and have a look into some of the things you're doing. It's certainly great work. So thank you so much for joining us today, Rick.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.